We are recording.
Welcome to our project presentation for our replication. Our article and the study that we used is entitled "The Effects of Video Self-Evaluation on Skill Acquisition with Yoga Postures."
Our group decided to replicate a study on increasing the accuracy of yoga poses through the use of video self-evaluation and video feedback. Downs, Miltenberg, Badowstri, and Witherspoon recruited 2 participants who were ages 21 and 24, both college students. Downs et al. Conducted this study because they found quite a bit of research on video self-evaluation to improve other behaviors, such as peer interactions with children with severe behavioral disabilities or posture at computer workstations, but there wasn't much research on using video self-evaluation in sports or other physical activities. Downs et al., their interventions consisted of recording the participants perform the yoga poses and have them watch and evaluate the video immediately after performing them. The participants evaluated their poses by using a task analysis that was developed for each pose. Downs et al. Would not be present while participants evaluated their videos, but they would separately evaluate the videos. Video feedback was implemented only if participants did not improve at a significant level. This consisted of the participant watching a practice video while the researcher gave feedback on every step of the task analysis. After the practice video, the participant would practice the pose again and immediately watch and evaluate his video. The materials necessary for this study were a video camera, laptop for viewing videos, and a yoga mat for participants. One of the reasons why our group selected this study is because we all have access to the materials necessary to replicate it. Some of us have never done yoga before, so replicating this study would give us an opportunity to finally try it out. Downs et al. Chose 3 common poses that are frequently introduced in a beginner's yoga class as the target behaviors, so this would be easy for us to replicate those who had never done yoga before. Another reason why we chose this study is because some of us have been wanting to do yoga more often because it is a great stress reliever. Also because of school and work, we are usually not able to make time for it, so replicating it in this study will allow us to include yoga in our busy schedules. The purpose of this study is to access video self-evaluation to increase the accuracy of yoga poses. According to Dowrick, one procedure that is proven to be effective for skill acquisition in a variety of areas is the use of video modeling and feedback. In this study, yoga poses will be taught through modeling. The participants will view various poses on YouTube and self-evaluate their progress through task analysis, checklists, and rewatching their recording. There will also be 2 blind observers per participant whom will be filling out the task analysis sheet as well.
Participants of our current study replication included 5 female graduate students, ages 23 to 32 years old, with various experience levels in yoga, enrolled in an advanced applied behavior analysis at Ball State University. Participants included Mary Catherine Bugle, 32 years old, Allison Gall, 25 years old, Sasha Gibson, 27 years old, Ruby Hernandez, 23 years old, and Courtney Galloway, 29 years old.
For the original study, the setting was a fitness lab, but for our replication of the study, the setting was our own homes. There were 3 materials for this study. The first is a camera to record yoga poses. It could be either a handheld camera or a smartphone with camera accessibility. The second is a laptop with internet access to YouTube in order to view the yoga videos. And the last is a yoga mat for participants' use for comfort. For the behavior definition, participants will use their bodies to form various yoga poses. One is the tree pose, in which the participant must place one foot on the ground and the other foot will be raised by their hand and placed against the inner thigh. The next pose is called Warrior Pose 2, in which the participant will stand with both feet on the ground, turn their feet towards the right, and stretch their arms out in an opposite direction. The last pose is Downward Facing Dog, in which the knees and palms are placed on the ground, then arms are stretched out and feet are walked backwards to extend the legs to form a triangle with their body.
Here are pictures of the 3 poses that we performed for the study. So it's the tree pose, the downward facing dog pose, and the warrior 2 pose. These poses were chosen because they are easy enough for someone with no yoga experience to learn. Okay. In the original study, data were collected using a task analysis for each pose. So each pose had its own task analysis that was developed by the researcher. And in order to assess social validity for the task analyses, a certified yoga instructor reviewed them and judged them whether they depicted the steps involved in each pose accurately. So during baseline, researchers took data on the participants' performances. And then during the intervention phase, participants took data on their own performances after being video recorded. So 2 observers that were blind to the experimental conditions were recruited, and they took data on 33% of video recording sessions in order to calculate IOA data. And the researchers of the study, they took data separately on the participants' performances during intervention phases. They did this separately in a different room, so they weren't together with the participants as they took data. And this was to assess treatment integrity. In our replication of the study, we developed the task analyses through videos of yoga instructors that performed and explained the steps of each pose. So the data were collected by participants after watching the videos of themselves performing the yoga poses. And on the task analysis, the participants indicated whether each step was performed correctly or incorrectly. The percentage correct was calculated by dividing the number of steps performed correctly by the total number of steps on the task analyses. We each recruited 2 observers that were blind to the experimental conditions who also took data in order to calculate IOA and also to assess treatment integrity. And here are pictures of our task analyses. So here it shows the tree pose task analyses, the warrior pose task analyses, and the downward facing dog task analysis.
The design of our study. We used a multiple baseline design across poses to assess the effects of video self-evaluation on 3 different yoga poses: the tree pose, warrior 2 pose, and the downward facing dog pose for each of the 5 participants throughout our study.
The original baseline conditions for the study included the participants following a certified yoga instructor that provided a verbal and physical model explanation for pose accuracy. Modifications for our project included a selection of a series of how-to videos on YouTube for all 3 target positions: the tree pose, downward facing dog pose, and warrior 2 pose. All the participants watched the same videos in order to control for accuracy. The baseline data was collected during at least two of the baseline sessions. The blind participants collected IOA data using the task analysis for each individual pose. All of the positions were performed 2 to 3 times for each baseline session, and no feedback or video review was provided for the participants during the baseline conditions. Here we have links to the 3 video models that the participants used during the baseline conditions, and all of the videos were provided by Howcast YouTube channel.
For our treatment procedure, participants attempted each yoga pose 2 to 3 times during each assessment session. 1 to 3 meetings per week were conducted throughout the experiment. In each meeting, 1 to 3 assessment sessions were conducted between participants and observers. The participants set up one camera or a cell phone with a camera facing the front of the participant and pressed the record button and the stop button. In the video self-evaluation phase, participants viewed their poses on video immediately after they had participated in the pose. Each participant evaluated the pose by using the task analysis to score each individual step in the pose. The following sessions consisted of participants scoring each video without assistance. The blind observers trained to use the task analysis separately scored the video. Percentage of agreement between the participant and one blind observer was calculated to assess treatment integrity. The duration of the 2 initial sessions were approximately 30 minutes, while the duration of later sessions was approximately 15 minutes. The video feedback phase was only to be implemented if a participant's pose showed minor improvements throughout the video self-evaluation phase. The participant was to practice a pose and watch the practice video, while the blind observer provided feedback. Next, the participant would again practice the pose and immediately watch their video as the blind observer provided feedback. None of the participants in our study showed minor improvements throughout the video self-evaluation phase and therefore did not use the video feedback phase.
For IOA, it was assessed in 33% of video recorded sessions. 2 independent blind observers that we recruited recorded correct and incorrect data using the task analyses worksheets we provided. Agreement was defined as both observers recording correct or incorrect for the same step within the same task analyses. And we calculated percentage of agreement for each pose by dividing the number of agreements between observers by the total number of steps in the task analyses, and then converting that number to a percentage. In the original study, treatment integrity was scored by comparing the task analyses between the researcher and the participant during video self-evaluation. Since we acted as researcher and participant, we measured treatment integrity by comparing the TAs from one of our blind observers to our own task analyses scores. And our task analyses were completed independent from those of our blind observers so that our data wasn't skewed. Agreement was calculated by dividing the number of steps agreed upon by both parties by the total number of steps in the task analyses. In following with the original study, TA or treatment integrity was calculated in 38% of trials for participants 2 and 4, and 50% of trials for participants 1, 3, and 5. If our calculations fell below 80%, our participants were retrained on how to use the task analyses worksheets. Retraining for us was not necessary. Our treatment integrity numbers remained well above the 80% mark. As you can see, most of us got 100%. If it wasn't 100% for treatment integrity, it was in the 90s. So we were well above the 80% cutoff.
Hi, I'm Mary Catherine, and I am participant 1. Shown here are my results in the data table. I had no prior experience in doing yoga, but I did find that it was easy to catch on to the poses, especially after the baseline and evaluating myself. For tree pose, my average baseline was 79%, and my range was 38 to 100%. My intervention for tree pose was 98%. and my range was 92 to 100%. For downward facing dog, my average baseline was 91.5% and my range was 80 to 100%. My average intervention was 100% and my range was 0. And finally, for warrior pose 2, my average baseline was 96% and my range was 89 to 100%. And for intervention, the average was 100% and the range was again 0. My 2 blind observers were my husband and my friend. And for IOA, for tree pose, the baseline was 38 to 100% and the intervention was 100%. For downward facing dog, the baseline was 67 to 100% and intervention was 100%. And for warrior pose 2, the IOA baseline was 89 to 100% and the IOA intervention was 100%. Shown here are my graphs. The bottom left-hand corner is tree pose. The top middle is downward facing dog. And my lower right-hand graph is warrior pose 2. For baseline for these 3, you can see that it is increasing, and then for intervention, it's pretty stable at the 100% mark.
Hi, I'm Allison, and I am participant 2. These are my results represented in the data table shown. This was my first ever time replicating a study. Although I do have some experience in the past with yoga, I have not done yoga for a while, and it was nice to get back into it as a good stress reliever. Although it took some dedication and there was a lot of the study aspects were new to me, it was also very rewarding. For the tree pose, my baseline average was 96%, and my baseline range was from 92% to 100%. For my treatment average was 100%, and my treatment range was 0. For the warrior 2 pose, my baseline average was 91%, and my baseline range was from 77% to 100%. My treatment average for warrior 2 was 100%, and the treatment range was 0. For the downward facing dog pose, my baseline average was 97%, and the baseline range was from 83% to 100%. The treatment average for a downward facing dog was 100%, and the range was 0. The 2 blind observers that I recruited to record my data were my sister and my mom. My IOA data for the tree pose was a baseline average of 90% and a baseline range of 92 to 100%. The IOA data for the warrior 2 pose was a baseline average of 91% and a baseline range from 88% to 100%. IOA data for the downward facing dog pose was baseline average of 97.1% and a range of 83 to 100%. For all 3 treatment phases, my treatment average for IOA was 100% and the IOA treatment range was 0. And here is a copy of my graph. I used a multiple baseline design across poses and represented percent correct of the task analysis. The top graph shows the tree pose, followed by the warrior 2 pose in the middle, and ending with the downward facing dog pose. As you can see from my baseline and treatment phases, the baseline data was high from having a small background in doing yoga, and I believe there may not have been a great representation of treatment effects during the video self-evaluation phase because of this.
Hi, I'm Courtney. I'm participant 3, and this is my data table. You can see that for tree pose, my baseline average was 79%, and my scores ranged from 70 to 85. For intervention for tree, my average was 98 and the range was 92 to 100. For downward facing dog, my average was 79% and scores ranged from 67 to 83. For the intervention phase for downward facing dog, both my average was 100% and the range was 0. For Warrior 2, my average was 74% and my range was 67 to 89. And for intervention for Warrior 2, my average was 97 and my range was 89 to 100. My 2 independent blind observers were my husband and my friend. And for IOA, I calculated 100% agreement for all poses in both baseline and intervention phase. And this is my multiple baseline graph across poses. It shows percentage correct on task analyses. The top graph is tree pose, in the middle is downward facing dog, and the bottom is Warrior 2.
My name is Sasha Gibson, and I was the 4th participant for this replication. I have some background in yoga, so I also had some high baseline ranges, so there's not a lot of treatment effect observed during the video self-evaluation phase. For tree pose, which is the graph shown at the top, there was a baseline range of 85 to 92% with an average of 87.8%. And then within the treatment range, there is a range of 92 to 100% and a average of 99.3%, and the maintenance was 100%. The downward facing dog is the second graph. Within the baseline, the range was 56 to 78%. The average was 64.3%. The treatment range had an average of 78 to 100% with an average of 93.8%, and the maintenance had a 100% accuracy. For Warrior 2, which is the bottom graph here, there was a baseline range of 67 to 83% with a baseline average of 74.4%. Within the treatment condition, there is a range of 83 to 100% with an average of 95.8%, and the maintenance had an average of 100% accuracy. My independent blind observers for this were my husband and my brother. Their IOA was calculated across all 3 phases with a range of 77 to 95% accuracy with an average of 89%. And within the treatment and maintenance conditions, there was an average of 100% IOA.
My name is Ruby Hernandez, and I was the 5th participant. So here are my results for each pose. In the first table, it shows my results for Warrior Pose 2. I had 5 baseline sessions. The average for my baseline was 86%, and then the range was 78 to 88. And then I had 15 treatment sessions for Warrior Pose 2 with an average of 98.4 and a range of 88 to 100%. And then for downward facing dog, I had 6 baseline sessions with an average of 77.7% with a range of 67 to 83%. And I had 14 treatment sessions with an average of 95.1% and a range of 83 to 100%. For the tree pose, I had 7 baseline sessions with an average of 83.7%, a range of 77 to 92%. And I had 13 treatment sessions with an average of 93.4% and a range of 85 to 100%. And my blind observers were my brother and my sister. The mean inter-observer agreement across behaviors was 87.8% with a range of 54 to 100% for my baseline, and 93.3% with a range of 83 to 100% for my intervention phase. And here are my graphs. I used a multiple baseline design across the yoga poses. The first graph shows my Warrior Pose 2 data, and then the second graph shows my downward facing dog pose. And then the last graph shows my tree pose data. So I did not have any experience with yoga prior to the study. So these poses were very basic, so they were easy for me to perform. So I think that had to do with my high percentages.
Okay, so our conclusions. For all participants, improvement in pose accuracy was observed during treatment conditions across all 3 poses. We all maintained a high percentage of accuracy during maintenance sessions. No retraining was necessary. Video self-evaluation can be an effective way to increase pose accuracy and skill acquisition. This was observed for all of us, even though some of us were novice and some of us had intermediate level yoga experience. And video self-evaluation is a relatively inexpensive tool for skill acquisition and maintenance.
Some of the limitations that we observed in this study were the task analyses for the individual poses did have a limited number of steps. So missing a single step did have a dramatic impact on the percentage of accuracy. Participants with a high baseline average cannot demonstrate significant treatment effect. The multiple baseline design does present compound variable in that the participants are practicing poses that are not currently in the treatment condition for extended number of treatment sessions. So the improvement in pose accuracy could be due to the increased number of opportunities to practice over time. The additional compound is the model and verbal prompt provided by the yoga instructor during the baseline condition. Here are the references if you're interested in reviewing the original study or any of the YouTube videos that the participants used during baseline.